The thing about a delivery route is that it teaches you something nobody else will. Routine is a kind of invisible thread that holds the world together every morning. I'd climb into that white van, my name, Eli Navarro, stitched into the collar of my uniform shirt, slightly crooked because I'd ironed it in a hurry, and I'd drive the same streets, knock the same doors, and hand over the same carefully packaged slices of other people's lives. Books, supplements, baby gear, electronics, things people needed badly enough to click a button at midnight. I didn't mind. Honestly, there's a strange dignity in being the person who brings things to doorsteps. You're a small miracle for someone every single day. And most people don't even know your name, but he always knew mine. Unit 4B, Hartwell Terrace. A converted Victorian building on the quieter end of my route, tucked behind an old oak tree whose roots had long since cracked the pavement into a mosaic. I started delivering to that address in early February, the dead middle of winter, when the city felt gray and sealed shut like an envelope no one wanted to open. His name on the packages was always the same: Daniel Parrish. The first time I knocked, I remember the cold. My fingers were stiff inside my gloves, and I'd been running 10 minutes behind because a lorry had blocked the lane near the market. I knocked twice. Regulation knock. Firm and professional, and waited. The door opened slowly, and there he was. He was taller than I expected. Most people who order a lot of packages are, in my experience, either very elderly or very young, very harried or very still. Daniel Parrish was none of those things, and somehow, all of them at once. He stood in the doorway in a dark navy sweater, sleeves pushed to his elbows, reading glasses pushed up onto his forehead like he'd forgotten they were there. His hair was dark brown, slightly longer on top, the kind of effortlessly tousled that takes either zero effort or enormous effort, and I genuinely could not tell which. He had a jaw that looked like it had been drawn by someone who took geometry seriously. He looked at me. I looked at him. "Package for Daniel Parrish?" I said, which was what I always said because it was the right thing to say. "That's me," he said. Low voice, unhurried, he reached out to take the parcel, and his fingers, long, careful fingers, the kind that belong to people who build things or play instruments, curled around the box with a particular deliberateness. He didn't grab. He received. "Thanks," he said. And then, just before the door closed, "Stay warm out there." That was it. I walked back to the van thinking about nothing in particular, which is what I always told myself whenever. I found myself thinking about something very particular indeed. Over the next 3 months, it became a pattern so consistent I could have set a clock by it. I'd arrive at Hartwell Terrace. I'd walk up the 3 cracked steps. I'd knock, and Daniel Parrish would open the door exactly the same way every time, slowly, left hand on the handle. A brief pause, 2, maybe 3 seconds before he pulled it fully open, as though he needed a moment to compose himself. Or perhaps to prepare for whatever the outside world had decided to send him today. He'd take the package with both hands if it was large, one hand if it was small. He'd say, "Thanks," every time. And every time, without exception, he'd add something small, a single sentence, brief and warm, like a stamp pressed into wax before it dried. "Looks like it might rain later. Hope your afternoon's easier than your morning. There's a good bakery 3 streets down if you haven't tried it." Small things, unremarkable things. Except that over the weeks they started to feel less like small talk and more like, I don't know, breadcrumbs. Kind you leave for someone when you want them to be able to find their way back. I started noticing things I had no professional reason to. Noticed that he always smelled faintly of coffee and something warmer beneath it, cedar, maybe, or sandalwood. That his reading glasses were always either on his face or on his forehead, never anywhere else. That there was always soft music playing somewhere inside the flat, not loud enough to identify, but present, like a heartbeat the building had developed on its own. That he never looked past me. He always looked at me. Most people, when they open the door to a delivery person, look at the package. They're already mentally unwrapping it, already past you, already gone. Daniel Parrish looked at me first. Every single time, like I was the thing that had arrived. Like maybe, just maybe, I was the part of the delivery he'd actually been waiting for. I told myself I was reading into it. I was very good at telling myself things. I'm 28 years old. I've been out since I was 19, not dramatically, not with a speech or a moment of television-worthy revelation, but quietly. The way you come out when you live in a family that loves you, but doesn't quite have the vocabulary yet for what you are. My mom cried a little. My dad shook my hand, which, for a man of his particular generation in silence, was the same as a standing ovation. My younger sister already knew. She'd always known I'd had 2 relationships. The first was intense and consuming, and ended when we realized we were 2 very different kinds of lonely. The second was gentler, kinder, and ended when he got a job opportunity in another country, and we were honest enough with each other to admit that we hadn't built anything strong enough to survive the distance. Since then, I'd been not closed exactly. More like a shop that's open but hasn't updated its window. It's display in a while. Present. Functional. Just not particularly advertising. And then there was Daniel Parrish. Opening his door the same way every time. Looking at me like I was the first interesting thing to happen on an otherwise unremarkable Wednesday. I mentioned him once, offhandedly to my coworker Priya, who shared my break schedule and had the particular talent of extracting confessions from people without them realizing she was doing it. It's this guy on my route, I said, eating a cold sandwich. He's always very, present. Priya looked at me over her coffee cup. Present. Attentive. He always says something nice when I drop off a package something nice, she repeated. Stop doing that. I'm not doing anything. She sipped her coffee with the expression of a woman who is doing everything. What's his name? Why does that matter? It doesn't, she said cheerfully. But you already know it, don't you? I looked at my sandwich. Daniel, I said. She smiled into her cup. She said nothing more, which was, if anything, worse. March became April. The oak tree outside Hartwell Terrace began to bud, small green promises unfolding along its oldest branches. I noticed because I was, by that point, noticing everything about that address. His orders had a rhythm too, I realized. Architecture books, thick, serious ones, with covers that felt important. Specialty coffee beans from a small batch roaster. Occasionally, art supplies, a set of precise drawing pens, a particular kind of heavyweight paper. Sometimes records vinyl, the old-fashioned kind, sleeved in cardboard that smelled of nostalgia in someone else's living room. He was building something, I thought. Or preserving something. Or both. One afternoon in mid-April, I arrived slightly earlier than usual. The route had run smooth for once. Every light green, every lane clear, the city briefly cooperating with the day. I knocked. The pause before the door opened was longer than usual. When it did, Daniel was wearing a light gray t-shirt instead of his usual sweater, and his hair was slightly damp at the ends, like he'd recently showered. He had a pencil tucked behind his ear. There was a small smudge of something dark, graphite, maybe along the inside of his left wrist. He looked at me and something in his expression shifted. Not dramatically, just shifted. The way a room shifts when someone opens a window and the air changes. Early today, he said. I said, package for Daniel Parrish. He smiled then. Not a polite smile, a real one. The kind that starts in the eyes and arrives at the mouth a moment later, unhurried, like it meant to come all along. You always say that, he said. My name, I mean? Every time? I blinked. It's protocol, I know. His eyes were dark, a warm brown with flecks of something lighter near the center. I like it. He reached for the package, a flat rectangular one, his art paper. I knew from the dimensions, and as his fingers met the cardboard, the tips of them brushed very briefly. The edge of my gloved hand. Neither of us moved for a moment. Then he said, quietly, I've been meaning to ask, do you take the same route every day? Or does it change? Same route, I said. Monday through Saturday. He nodded slowly, like I'd confirmed something he'd already suspected. Then I'll see you Monday. He closed the door. Slowly, as always. Left hand on the handle. I stood on the cracked pavement and listened to the oak tree move above me in the April wind, and for the first time in a long time, I thought, something is about to happen. I just didn't know yet that I was right. Monday, after that conversation, arrived the way Mondays always do, with an alarm you don't remember, setting in a sky that can't decide whether it wants to commit to sunshine or not. I told myself the whole drive in that I was being ridiculous, that a brief exchange on a doorstep and an accidental brush of fingers through a glove was exactly that. Accidental, brief, ordinary. By the time I reached Hartwell Terrace, I had talked myself into and out of caring approximately 14 times. There was a package for 4B. Of course there was. There was always a package for 4B. I knocked. And then the thing that changed everything, the door opened fast, not slowly, not with that measured, deliberate pull I'd come to know, the way you know a piece of music you've heard enough times to anticipate every note. The door swung open quickly, fully, like he'd been standing just behind it, waiting. Like he'd been ready. Daniel was in a dark green Henley, the kind with 3 buttons at the collar, 2 of which were undone. His reading glasses were nowhere. His hair was not disheveled exactly, but unsettled, like he'd run a hand through it recently and hadn't checked a mirror since. He looked, in the most honest word I can find, unguarded. "Hey," he said, "not thanks. Not a comment about the weather or the bakery or the afternoon. Just, hey, 1 syllable. But the way he said it, warm, direct, slightly breathless, like he'd been holding it in his chest since Friday, made something in my rib cage tighten with a pleasant, terrifying pressure. "Hey," I said back, which was not protocol at all. He looked at the package I was holding as coffee beans. This time, a kilo bag in craft paper, and then he looked back at me. And then he did something he had never done before in all the months I'd been standing on this doorstep. He stepped slightly to the side and said, "Do you want to come in? I just made a fresh pot." The world briefly went very quiet. I heard the oak tree. I heard a car somewhere down the street. I heard my own heartbeat, which had apparently decided this was an appropriate moment to make itself known. "I'm still on shift," I said. "Right." He nodded. Not disappointed exactly, but something adjacent to it. "Of course, I have 45 more minutes on the route." He looked at me, but I said, and I don't know where the word came from, only that it came. I could come back, after. Something moved across his face. Relief. Maybe, or recognition, or something that had been waiting very patiently for a long time and was finally being allowed to exist. "I'll leave the door on the latch," he said. The last 45 minutes of that route were the longest of my professional life. I delivered a blender to a woman in a floral housecoat who wanted to tell me about her granddaughter's school play. I delivered 3 boxes to a man who signed for them without looking up from his phone. I delivered a small, carefully wrapped parcel to an elderly gentleman who examined the return address for a full minute before deciding it was safe to accept, and through all of it, I was somewhere else entirely. I was thinking about dark green Henley shirts and undone buttons. I was thinking about the way a door can open slowly for months, and then, one day, open fast, and how that difference, small as it sounds, can feel seismic. I was thinking about what it means when someone says, "I'll leave the door on the latch." It means, "I trust you to come back." I parked the van 3 streets away from Hartwell Terrace and sat in the driver's seat for 90 seconds, looking at my own hands on the steering wheel. "You're allowed this," I told myself. "You're allowed to walk through a door someone left open for you." I walked. The latch was off, as promised. I knocked anyway. It felt important, and heard his voice from somewhere inside. "Come in." The flat was exactly what I would have imagined if I'd let myself imagine it, which I had a little in the private hours of Thursday and Friday nights. It was tall-ceilinged and warm. with one large window that let in the late afternoon light like a painting deciding its own composition. There were bookshelves, floor to ceiling, on the far wall. It's organized in a way that was clearly personal and complex, by color in some sections, by apparent theme in others. A drafting table stood near the window, angled toward the light, covered in architectural drawings and those large sheets of heavyweight paper I'd delivered myself, and the records. Dozens of them, in wooden crates along the wall beneath the shelves. Their spines labeled in handwriting that was precise and slightly old-fashioned. It smelled of coffee, and cedar, and something else, a home that has been lived in thoughtfully, that has been chosen carefully, that belongs to someone who pays attention. Daniel came from what I assumed was the kitchen, carrying 2 mugs. He handed one to me with both hands, the way he always accepted packages deliberately, like the gesture meant something. "Black," he said. "I didn't know how you'd take it, but I figured if it was wrong I could fix it." "Black is perfect," I said, which was true. We looked at each other in the comfortable way of 2 people who have been having a slow conversation for months and have finally arrived at the same room to have it. "I don't usually do this," he said, settling onto the arm of the sofa nearest the window. "Invite the delivery person in." "I don't usually come back," I said. "I know." He held his mug with both hands. "That's why I asked," he told me, not all at once, but in the natural, an unhurried way of someone who trusts the conversation to find its own shape. That he was an architect. That he'd moved to this city from Edinburgh 2 years ago for a commission that had stretched into a career, and the flat had been meant to be temporary, but had become something else. That he lived alone, not unhappily, but with the particular awareness that living alone becomes more conscious the longer you do it. The set table for one. The second coffee mug, still in the cabinet. The music you choose as company. "I noticed the records," I said. His face shifted into something open and pleased. "Do you listen to vinyl?" "Not really. But I've delivered enough of yours to feel like I have." He laughed, a real laugh, sudden and bright. The kind that rearranges a person's face into something younger and less composed. I found that I wanted to make him do that again. "What was the first one you delivered?" he asked, I thought. "Nick Drake. Pink Moon." He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite categorize: warm, wondering, a little undone. "Of course it was," he said softly, like that meant something particular to him. We talked for an hour. I don't know how else to say it. We simply talked. The way do people talk when they've been circling each other's orbit for months and finally land in the same gravity? He asked about the route, about what it was like to move through the city the way I did. Seeing the same streets at different hours, watching neighborhoods wake and sleep. I told him about the elderly gentleman who always wanted to discuss the return address. He laughed again. I asked about the drawings on his drafting table. "He brought me over to look at community library project," he said. "Something he was designing pro bono for a neighborhood that had lost theirs in a redevelopment." He talked about it the way people talk about things that matter, with his hands, with pauses, with the slightly self-conscious energy of someone sharing something they care about too much to be casual. "It's going to have a reading garden," he said. "Outdoors, enclosed with benches and these low planters, so people can sit outside with a book and feel contained. Safe. Like a room without a ceiling," I said. He turned and looked at me very directly. "Yes," he said. "Exactly like that." The light from the window had shifted while we talked, the angled gold of late afternoon, softening into the blue-pink of early evening. I became aware of it slowly, and then all at once. "I should go," I said, though every part of me wanted to stay inside this tall-ceilinged, record-lined, coffee-smelling room for approximately the rest of my foreseeable future. He walked me to the door, and at the threshold, the same threshold I'd stood at for months with packages in my arms. On the other side of his slow, deliberate ritual, he paused. "Eli," he said. My name, in his voice, sounded different than I expected. More deliberate, like he'd been saving it. "Yeah," I said. "I'd like to, if you'd want to have dinner." "Not a package exchange." He smiled, slightly self-deprecating, slightly nervous. "An actual dinner? With chairs and intention." The oak tree outside sent a few early blossoms drifting across the cracked pavement. Yes, I said. I'd like that. He nodded. The tension in his shoulders eased by one visible degree. Saturday, he said. Saturday, I agreed. I walked down the 3 steps and back onto the street. And when I reached the pavement, I turned just once and looked back. He was still standing in the open doorway, both hands at his sides, watching me go. The evening light was behind him. He looked like someone who had been waiting for quite a long time. For something to finally begin, I raised a hand. He raised his. I walked home with my heart doing something complicated and hopeful in my chest. And I thought, this is what it feels like when a door opens differently. This is what it means. Saturday arrived the way good things do when you've been waiting for them. Slower than any other day of the week. Each hour stretching like taffy, the morning longer than it had any right to be. I changed my shirt 3 times. Not because any of them were wrong, but because I was 28 years old and apparently still capable of standing in front of a mirror, with my arms full of discarded linen. Asking my reflection what I thought I was doing. What I was doing, I told myself firmly. Pulling on a simple, dark burgundy button-down and leaving it at that. Was having dinner with a man I liked. It was, in the full accounting, that simple and that enormous. He'd texted me the address, a small Italian place on the far side of the market. The kind of restaurant that doesn't have a social media presence because it doesn't need one. Because the people who know about it have been going for years, and they don't particularly want it to become a destination. Dark wood tables, candles and old wine bottles. A menu that changed with what was good that week. Daniel was already there when I arrived, which I'd thought he might be. He was the kind of man who arrived places early. He stood when he saw me, a small, instinctive gesture. Old-fashioned in the best possible way, and he'd changed to a dark blue shirt, open at the collar, no reading glasses. He'd made an effort. I noticed. You found it, he said. I delivered 240 addresses a day, I said. Finding one restaurant is well within my skill set, he laughed. That sudden, rearranging laugh, and we sat. Dinner was, I want to find the right word. Easy isn't quite it, because there were moments of nervous energy. The particular electricity of 2 people sitting across from each other with intention. Aware of their own hands on the table, aware of the closeness of the other's breath, but it was the kind of electricity that doesn't frighten you. The kind that lights things up rather than burning them. We talked about Edinburgh. He'd grown up there, the middle child of 3, in a tall, narrow house near the university where his father lectured in philosophy. He'd been drawing buildings since before he could explain why. I just always wanted to know what was inside them, he said. What they were built to hold. We talked about my family, my mum's cooking, which operated on the principle that no problem was too large to be addressed with the right amount of food. My sister's new baby, 3 months old, and already apparently skeptical of everyone's choices. My dad, who had taken my coming out and processed it over 18 months into a kind of gruff, wordless protectiveness that expressed itself in phone calls to check I was eating and offers to fix things in my flat that didn't need fixing. He sounds wonderful, Daniel said. I said, just specific about how he shows it. Daniel smiled, quiet and understanding. My mom was like that, he said. A small pause. She passed 2 years ago. Part of why I came here, actually. Edinburgh had a lot of her in it. I needed somewhere that was just mine for a while. He said it simply, without asking for anything from it, not sympathy or reassurance, just truth, offered plainly. As he seemed to offer most things, I'm sorry, I said. Thank you. He looked at the candle for a moment. She would have liked you, I think. She liked people who paid attention. Something in that sentence settled over me quietly and warmly. Like a blanket placed over sleeping shoulders, we shared a dessert, a small, extravagant thing involving almonds and honey that neither of us had planned to order, and both of us were glad we did. We'd been there 2.5 hours. The restaurant had softened around us, the other tables thinning out, the candles burning lower in their bottles. There was a moment. I don't know how else to place it, where the conversation paused. Naturally. Not from discomfort, but from fullness. Like we'd said enough for now, and were content to simply be in the same space. breathing the same candlelit air. Daniel was looking at me. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yeah." "The first time you delivered to me, February. It was very cold. Do you remember?" "I remember when you left." He turned his wine glass slowly with one hand. "I stood at the window and watched you walk back to the van. And I thought, I hope he comes back tomorrow." I know that's not a particularly remarkable thought. "It is to me," I said. He looked up.
"I thought about you," I said.
After that first delivery, I told myself I wasn't, but I was. The corner of his mouth moved. "What did you tell yourself you were thinking about?" "Nothing in particular," I said, which was the exact same lie I'd told myself at the time. And we both knew it. We walked out into the night air, cool and clean. The city in that particular Saturday evening mode of people going places and the streets holding the leftover warmth of the day. We stood on the pavement outside the restaurant and neither of us reached for our phones or talked about getting a cab or said any of the things you say when you've decided the night is over it, because neither of us had decided that. "Walk with me." He said. We walked. The city at night is a different city. Same streets, same stones, but emptied of urgency. The shops closed, the traffic thinned, the whole thing breathing differently. We walked along the canal path. Daniel knew it well. Had walked it often in his first months here when he was still learning the geography of his new life, and the water reflected the lampposts in long, rippling lines of gold. We talked less now, comfortable in the quiet. Our arms occasionally close enough that the backs of our hands touched, and neither of us moved away. At some point, I couldn't tell you exactly when, because it happened the way things happen when they've been building slowly for long enough, without fanfare. Without announcement, he reached out and took my hand. Not reached, more like arrived. His hand found mine the way a key finds a lock it was made for. And our fingers interlaced and we kept walking. And neither of us said anything because there was nothing that needed to be said about it. It was simply true. We stopped at a bridge. Below us, the canal moved slowly south. Above us, the city's light turned the sky a soft amber gray, the color of old photographs. "I've been looking forward to this for a while," he said. "The walk." I asked, though I knew what he meant. "You," he said simply. "Specifically you." Outside of a doorstep, I turned to look at him. In the lamplight, he was all warm edges, the slope of his jaw, the dark of his eyes, the slight uncertainty still present in him, the bravery underneath it. He was a man who opened his door slowly, always with care. Who looked at you first before looking at the thing you'd brought him. Who left coffee brewing for someone he hoped would come back. "Daniel," I said. "Yeah, I'm glad you asked me in." He smiled, slow, genuine, the one that starts in the eyes. "I'm glad you came back." We stood there on the bridge for a long time, looking at the water and the lamplight in the city that had, without our asking, become the backdrop of something that felt like a beginning. His thumb moved, slow and warm, across the back of my hand. And then, because some moments earn themselves, I leaned in. And he leaned in, and we met somewhere in the middle. The way do people meet when neither of them is waiting for the other to do all the work? The kiss was soft, unhurried, warm. It tasted of almond and honey, and something that was simply him. When we pulled back, his forehead rested against mine for a moment. "Okay," he said softly. "The way you say something when everything you meant has already been communicated." "Okay," I said back. The weeks that followed were the kind of weeks you save inside yourself. The kind you'll be able to recall decades later with full sensory detail. The exact weight of the air. The particular quality of a light through a specific window. The sound of a voice saying your name in a particular tone that has since become the standard by which all other tones are quietly, involuntarily measured. I still delivered to Hartwell Terrace. Of course I did. But now, sometimes, the door would open before I knocked because he'd heard the van or seen me coming up the path. Sometimes there was no package at all and he'd texted me to knock anyway, because he had leftover soup and it was a cold day and he'd made too much. Sometimes I'd finish my route and come back and find music playing inside Proper Music Now. something I could identify because he was playing it louder. Less for background and more as a statement, and I'd stand at the top of the 3 cracked steps and just listen for a moment before knocking. He came to my flat too. Met my sister and the skeptical baby, who looked at Daniel with great seriousness before reaching out to grab his finger with both tiny hands, which Daniel received with the same deliberate care he received everything. My sister gave me a look that said several paragraphs worth of things she was politely not saying in front of company. We went to galleries, to markets, to the bakery 3 streets from his flat that he'd mentioned on my second delivery, and that was, objectively, as good as promised. We drove out of the city one Sunday in May and walked a headland path above the sea, the wind enormous and alive. The horizon so vast and clear it felt, being inside an argument for the possibility of things. He showed me the library plans as they progressed. The reading garden took shape on paper first, the low planters, enclosed walls, the benches turned at angles to catch the morning light. He explained each decision the way he explained everything, carefully, passionately, with the confidence of someone who has thought deeply and the humility of someone who knows they can still be surprised. It's a room without a ceiling, I said. Looking at the plans, he looked at me from across the drafting table with those dark, warm eyes. Yeah, he said. Exactly. In June, the library broke ground. I was there on a Thursday afternoon, standing in a scrubby, empty lot on the east side of the city that was about to become something deliberate and good. There were people from the neighborhood and the project team, and a local councilwoman who gave a short speech about the value of public space, and Daniel stood slightly to the side of all of it. Watching the first earth turn with an expression on his face that I recognized, it was the same expression he'd had on the canal bridge. Looking at the water, present and grateful, and quietly amazed by his own good fortune. I stood beside him. After the speeches, he found my hand without looking. "You're going to put a dedication plaque," he said quietly. "For my mom. She'd love it," I said. He squeezed my hand. Said nothing. Which was, as I'd learned, his particular fluency. The things he felt most deeply, he said most quietly. Later that evening, back at his flat, while his vinyl turned softly in the background, Nick Drake, of course, Pink Moon. All the way through, I sat in the corner of his sofa and watched him make tea in the kitchen. Moving around the space with the ease of a man at home in his own life, and I thought about doors. About the way some doors open slowly, measured, and deliberate, because the person behind them has learned to be careful with who they let in, and about how when someone like that finally flings a door open fast, fully, with both hands and no hesitation, it means something. It means you've been waited for. It means you've been worth the waiting. He came back with 2 mugs and handed one to me with both hands, as always. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, settling beside me. "Doors," I said. He looked at me, curious, the lamplight warm on his face. "The way yours opened differently," I said. "That Monday. It was fast. It was quiet for a moment. I'd been standing at it for 2 minutes before you knocked," he said. I kept telling myself to act natural. I laughed, and so did he. And the laughter filled the tall-ceilinged room the way music fills a room, fully, joyfully. Leaving no cold corners, I put my head on his shoulder. He put his head on mine. Outside, the city moved through its long June evening, the light still gold at 8 o'clock. The oak tree on the cracked pavement putting out its full summer foliage, its branches enormous and generous above the 3 front steps. Inside, we were still. 2 people held by a room that had been chosen carefully, that had been lived in thoughtfully, a room with a ceiling, and everything we needed.